Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the podcast by Bob Jones Seminary, Theologically Speaking, and we're delighted to have joined with us today Dr. Tim Davis. And Dr. Tim Davis and I share something that most of you might not know, but we both, he currently pastors Grace Baptist Church of Waterford, and I was the first pastor of Grace Baptist Church of Waterford, and so it's a delight to share this time together, Tim. Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate your work there and the opportunity to connect here.
Absolutely. So we're looking at your dissertation, and you've chose a topic on the Olivet Discourse, and specifically approaching the preaching to add help to preachers. Why don't you share a little bit about what brought you into this topic?
All right. Longer story short, I was trying a couple different avenues to write a dissertation in preaching, and I was bumping my head up against getting those accomplished, and COVID had to help in that. But as I was currently, not presently now, but at that time preaching through Matthew's Gospel, I was getting close to the Olivet Discourse in the progress of preaching through the book. And I'm a resource junkie. I like to have everything that's available and try and read as much of it as I can just to be thinking about the text. So I had obviously preached through the Sermon on the Mount, and there was a whole host, 30, 40, 50 books of sermons on the Sermon on the Mount that you can see how people have divided passages and good illustrations. And I was looking to do something similar for the Olivet Discourse, one of the 5 major sections of Matthew's teaching component. And there was just nothing there.
Yeah.
There were no resources, and I contacted a few friends, some former seminary professors, and I was like, what do you have on this? And there's all kinds of articles
Right.
and literature on the Olivet Discourse, but there wasn't something for me as a preacher to try and to see where the pitfalls were, see how things were handled, and just kind of chart a course going forward. And so I brought those frustration of trying to figure out what to write about with kind of dawned on me like, well, you could try and help somebody else by tackling this subject in a format for preaching.
Yeah, and I think your work all the way through the Matthew to that point helped you in even framing up and being really prepared to enter into that section and provide some really quality preaching notes. Part of your dissertation provides kind of an overview tracing a little bit of Matthew's argument. So you want to comment to how that kind of just brought you right into this text?
I think contextual preaching, the more context you understand, the better you understand the various components of that. And yet, when there are distinct units, like the Olivet Discourse, there's a valuable function to say, I want to focus on eschatology. Here's an eschatology text. And I'm not going to do a whole series on Matthew to focus on eschatology. So I wanted to include in the dissertation the flow of the argument to help see, because there are significant clues along the way.
Right.
For instance, Jesus repeatedly uses this generation for the nation of Israel and her unbelief from the Exodus onward, drawing on Deuteronomy. And that is a really crucial question when it comes to the timing of the events of the Olivet Discourse, or the search for signs.
Right.
We tend to take it positively, and we look at I was reading an article this last week. It had 11 signs that would take place before Jesus comes back, drawn from the Olivet Discourse, and yet Matthew's use of sign is negative.
Right.
And so to kind of get some of that context to see how that plays out, I thought would be a benefit if I were a preacher wanting to focus only on the Olivet Discourse,
Right.
to have some resource to kind of trace.
Yeah, I think especially this generation, that connection point. But again, the kingship issues are just so central to Matthew and coming into the Olivet Discourse. But you mentioned also eschatological preaching. So, and part of what you commented on, and I think I agree, and in fact, Dr. Hand and I had this conversation the other day, that kind of because of the day we live and the triaging people are doing. It's like eschatology is a third tier triage,
Right.
and is in many ways not preached that regularly.
Right. So kind of tying all of that together, in commentaries on Matthew that are sermons, you'll see, 10, 12 sermons on the Sermon on the Mount.
Sure.
But then you get to the Olivet Discourse and it's one, maybe two sermons. And so, we preach eschatology, but we don't give it the same emphasis that we do, the other areas of, Christian living is
Right.
really important, we say, but then we dismiss eschatology from the importance of helping us live in light of that future day.
Right.
And I think that's weakened the church by our, like you said, the triaging of moving things down. We're afraid to be too wacky dispensationalist,
Right.
or to take too strong a stand on anything, just to kind of fit in with whatever the milieu of the post-trib, post-mill, whatever group is most popular at the moment. And so we'll just keep it more generic. Jesus is coming back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it undercuts the clarity of the scriptures' prophetic texts,
Right.
not just in Olivet Discourse, but throughout the Old Testament as well.
Right. Well, even I think Paul in 1 Thessalonians, when Paul deals with the nature of conversion,
Correct.
and he has turning to God from idols, he has in there, and to wait for his son from heaven.
Correct.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 1 and 2 Thessalonians, Paul is dealing a whole lot with eschatology.
Yeah.
In a church he spent very little time at.
Correct.
Which would seem to suggest we probably ought to do better.
Well, though, I'd say just from the opening of our Bible, Genesis 3:16 is a prophetic text.
Sure.
And faith is by nature, we're always looking forward to the fulfillment of the promise. And when we're not looking forward and we're just focused on the present, then we are weaker because we're not living in light of the fulfillment of our faith when we see him face to face. So 1 John 3,
Yep.
when we see him, then we'll be like him. That we have that hope purifies us now. And we sometimes minimize the hope of the future by not focusing on the eschatological events that the Lord has given to us.
Right. And so part of the burden of this project is to actually give pastors some help to push them into that eschatology of the Olivet Discourse and say, we need to preach this, we need to give clarity,
Right.
because that's a part of the biblical hope that we have as given, connected to the assurance of a promise, right?
Correct. And I think that's, again, for me, the weekly grind of preaching, and there are difficult texts that, you can't do a dissertation on it.
Right.
And so if there's a resource that can help to, bring some of the pieces together, or at least point in the direction of the resources that can be of help in the limited time that we have, that would hopefully be a means of blessing to some pastors who are out there working so hard.
Absolutely. So how about a couple of discoveries along the way that you thought were really significant and you would love to share?
I'd say for me, the biggest discovery that kind of, I waffled back and forth. I preached through Mark and Luke on going through both those books, and so I've gone through the Olivet Discourse and those. And there's a lot of arguments on every side about the Lord and his teaching on the raptures that found in the Olivet Discourse. And so I became more convinced in how Matthew portrays that and how that connects with both Mark and Luke and then other New Testament texts, that Jesus really is the fountainhead of the teaching of the rapture and the preparation for that. And I wasn't going in to look for that, but I think that was helpful for me in this process. I would say the issue of the timing of the events and how that plays out in Jesus answering the questions in all of the Gospels, I think was a easily missed thing by me when I had preached in Mark and Luke, and it's much clearer having worked through this process of seeing how the Lord deals with the future. That's not as clear for disciples, but is much clearer now for us, and how it all fits together, and in the way he answers his question, the questions they have, and prepares them for that, and how they unpack that would be another thing that was really helpful for me in the process, and seeing Israel's role in that. And as I'd say, third kind of benefit for me is just talking about prophecy, because I love the Old Testament, and I love preaching. And right now I'm preaching through a lot of prophecy, Ezekiel right now, and all of the prophetic works can be hard for us as church saints, but they're obviously preserved by God for us. And so harmonizing that transgenerational
Right.
ability to say, this is a future literal promise for a future Israel, but it's connected to our Messiah, who is their Messiah. And how does that relate to where we live now? Because for all of them,
Right.
they never got the fulfillment of the promise.
Right.
And though we won't have that promise, we will see the fulfillment of the promise just like they will one day by faith. And so learning how to apply prophetic scripture and trying to wrestle through that in this process, I found to be very beneficial. And I hope to still do more of pressing into that, my application of that in my preaching. But it was really helpful to do those three things, I'd say.
Absolutely. And I think that you're providing a resource that I think pastors will benefit from, and will all benefit from, seeing how to take those the prophetic text you mentioned, because obviously all the discourse deals with so many issues of prophecy, and seeing that connection to how that's going to play out for Israel, but what that means for the church, and especially in light of the imminency of a coming of Christ. So I think you're connecting those dots together is super helpful.
And I'm thankful the teachers I've had throughout seminary here and throughout my past have always emphasized that correlation, and I hope to just be another step in trying to correlate some of those texts.
All right. One final thought that I want you to just speak into. You mentioned the process as the punishment. I thought that was a good statement.
Well, it was not bad. It was just the Lord disciplines us.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of making a play on that. But it's hard, it's hard to it's like nothing else to write a dissertation.
Yeah.
You're proud of what you've done. I mean, sinfully proud, but and then somebody saying, no, you got to change this, or I might use the words, in other words, a far few many times. And so that's humbling of you to just learn to rank under your teachers, and teachers don't focus on that on every paper that you've written along your way, but in this process, so that was hard. But it's also just, it feels never ending.
Yeah.
It feels hopeless at times. There's like, I finished. Wait, I've got 3 more chapters,
Yeah.
And so the Lord really blessed me in the process of just trying to mold me as a person by going through writing the dissertation. And it was hard. In fact, a few friends and I have commiserated over how hard it was, but it was good hard. It was the loving discipline of my father, who wants to grow me as a person and help me in that. And the seminary was very influential in helping me to be able to grow by means of that process. And I'm very thankful for it.
Well, I want to commend you, Tim, for just an amazing amount of work, research, careful scholarship. I think you did an outstanding job, and I think we're all benefited by it. So thank you for enduring the hardness for us all, and I think we'll profit from this work, and I know your church has profited from your preaching. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you for the time.